Now, following up this spiritual consciousness idea, let us see what it is that constitutes spiritual consciousness. We started with saying that God constitutes individual consciousness. But now you must remember that superimposed upon that consciousness is the human mentality, the human intellect, which has accepted two powers, two laws, two selves, myself and yourself. Oh, it's gone further than that. It's even said that some of us are English and some are Americans and some are Africans. And, oh, the human mind has built up a tremendous thing, all of which hides the God consciousness which is mine. Therefore, as a human, I have no access to God consciousness at all. And it is for this reason that as a human, anything can happen to me, and most things do. Sin, disease, false appetite, poverty, anything happens to this race. Wars, slavery, imposition, injustice. Everything happens to the human race. Why? Because it has no access to the divine consciousness, which all of the time is the consciousness of mankind. Therefore, what is this spiritual consciousness which is the healer? Well, it is my consciousness, in the degree that I have become enlightened to the errors of the human mind. In other words, in the degree that I come to know that there is not God and man, that God is manifested as man, as you will learn in the book The Infinite Way. As I begin to know that I and the Father are one and I am that one, as I begin to know that since I and the Father are one, all that the Father hath is mine, I am building myself. I am really dying to all that constitutes human belief and being reborn in my original consciousness. Now, just think what the human believes. Where is your supply? And what is your supply? Now just think of what Christ consciousness knows. I am the bread, the meat, the wine, and the water. I have meat the world knows not of. I have hidden manna. Well, in that 1 second, I have died to that part of humanhood which believes that I must earn a living, fight for a living, struggle for a living, inherit a living, steal for a living. All of that degree of humanhood has left me. And all of a sudden I'm at rest in the consciousness that says, I have meat the world knows not of. I have meat the world knows not of. I have hidden manna. I have the spiritual bread, meat, wine, and water. I have even the power of resurrection within me. Just think of not having to go to God for these things. Just think of not having to go to man for these things, but of awakening to the realization that I, in my I-ness, I embody them all. Do you not see that I have died to that part of humanness, and I have been reborn into some measure of spiritual consciousness? All right? In my humanhood, I believe in two powers, the power of health and the power of sickness. But when I grasp the principle of one power, I've died to another part of my humanness. And I don't even need God now to get me my health, since there's no power of ill health, no law of ill health. Do you not see that in some measure I have died to my humanhood and been reborn into my spiritual consciousness? Well, in humanhood I have been taught that good people get rewards and bad people get punishments. And therefore, when people come around with sins and diseases and poverties, my natural inclination is to believe, oh, well, you're getting punished, you're getting what's coming to you. But just imagine that in a moment, when I realize that God neither punishes nor rewards, God neither gives nor withholds, look at how I look at you. And in this minute I have died to that measure of humanness. I have been reborn into some measure of the spiritual consciousness that does not judge, criticize, condemn. All of which the Master taught was Christ consciousness. Do you see that? In my humanhood, my enemies always deserve what they get. But I cannot be a practitioner or a teacher in that consciousness. I cannot. I have to be constantly realizing the spiritual identity of them and the fact that the errors that make them my enemies are this, all tied up in this mortal illusion, this belief in two powers. I have probably told you before that during the war I couldn't arouse this great hate for Hitler that so many people were feeling. And people would come to me and say, I don't understand it. With your Jewish background and ancestry, I think you'd hate him more than anybody in the world. And I'd say, well, heavens, what am I going to do if he phones me tomorrow and says that he's sick and wants me to give him a treatment? I've got to say you're spiritual. Well, I might as well start right now. Well, it was the same way. They try to tell me that the right work for a practitioner was to know mentally each day that those who need me will be led to me. And I said, how can I do that? And then after they come to me, say you're spiritual. Why don't I start right out in the morning with everybody is spiritual and nobody needs me? And I did that and everybody came to me. You see, to hold a human judgment is human consciousness. And there's no healing in it. Therefore, only as human consciousness is overcome, human qualities, human judgments, human beliefs, human powers, am I reborn into the spiritual consciousness, which when you reach out for help, that's what you're touching. You're not touching anybody that's criticizing, judging, or condemning you. You're not even touching a consciousness that believes you're sick. You're not touching a consciousness that believes there are two powers. Therefore, you are touching the divine consciousness, which is closer to you than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. So it is that you cannot be a teacher or practitioner in this message and yet go on living according to human standards because you'd only be paying lip service to these principles. And that would not be a consciousness. I know. You have to actually develop the consciousness that does not fight evil, that does not judge it, that does not seek to punish it. You have to actually develop that consciousness that recognizes that not only I and my Father are one, but that I and you are that same one, because there's only one I, one selfhood. But saying those words is lip service until you have come into some measure of realization. Now, I don't mean that any one of us has fully attained. Don't think that I'm advertising myself. I don't mean that any one of us has fully attained. I only mean this is the goal, and in proportion as we attain this goal, in that proportion are we teachers and practitioners. Even though we haven't at any time reached the full measure of manhood in Christ Jesus. Whether we ever will on this plane or not, I don't know. But to me, that's not too important. The important thing to me is that each day that I live up to as much as I can understand and realize today. Not to make any pretensions that I've gone beyond that. Not to assume a consciousness I haven't attained. I remember one time when I was first reader in Christian Science Church. 5 minutes before I was to go on the platform, I developed a cold. And all of a sudden, my nose and eyes began pouring forth water. And my second reader said, "Shall I get a substitute for you?" And I said, "No, I'm the first reader. I'm going on the platform." "That way?" "Yeah, I'm going that way." And I went that way, but I went with two handkerchiefs this way. And I turned the pages this way. Well, of course, not only the audience, the congregation was shocked, but I could see the board of directors over there just waiting for it to be over. 50 minutes went by. That continued. And in the 50th minute, the whole thing cleared as rapidly as it came. There wasn't a sign or trace. I put the handkerchiefs away, and I was fine. "Well, then, what a wonderful demonstration you made." "What do you mean, a wonderful demonstration? There were 240 of you scientists sitting out here giving me treatment. Don't you believe in them?" Well, that's what I was counting on. I was going to get all these free treatments, get a healing. And I did. I did. Well, now, wouldn't it be foolish to claim that I didn't have a cold? Wouldn't it be foolish to try to hide that I had a cold? Well, what's the use of all that? I haven't made any claims anywhere that Joel has attained his full Christhood. Therefore, I don't have to show forth any perfection. I'm happy indeed if you only see the measure of spiritual attainment that Joel has received, and be grateful for that, and then watch the rest as it unfolds, or whatever is to come. And so it is. I never ask spiritual perfection of our students. Heaven forbid that I should expect it of knowing that I myself haven't attained it. But I'm so grateful with every sign that they give me that they are spiritually progressing. In other words, they are dying daily. How long should that dying go on? It doesn't say in the Bible. It doesn't say. It just says daily. Well, daily could go on forever. And maybe there is a dying daily forever, because maybe we never do attain the fullness, because if we did, it seems to me we'd be God Almighty. It's only in the perfection that we, in the degree that we haven't attained that we're not fully God. So let us not worry about how far we are from the full stature of manhood in Christ Jesus. Let us be grateful that the message has given us some measure of spiritual light and grace, and that we are some degree further along the path of dying daily and being reborn, and let's keep it up each day, so that each day we die to some human belief, or some measure of some human belief, and each day be reborn to some activity of spiritual awareness. Because you may be assured of this: the degree of spiritual consciousness that I have attained is omnipresence, and it is where you are. Therefore, you need do nothing further than just lift up your eyes, and I am with you. That's all. It isn't my person. It isn't my knowledge. It's the degree to which I have died to humanhood and been reborn to spirituality, and it's that degree that is producing the healings for you. And perhaps if it doesn't produce 100%, it may be that I haven't attained the 100% that would be necessary. Now, in this transition that is about to take place in the infinite way, you are going to be led to a revelation which you may or may not be able to accept. If you are not able to accept it, let me say to you, as a student of the infinite way, don't throw it aside and say it's wrong, because you can't see through my eyes. You can't see through my vision. On the other hand, don't accept it because I give it to you. Because I have never been one to encourage blind faith. I don't believe in blind faith. And it is always my hope that when a principle is presented in the message of the infinite way, that the students will eventually come to the realization of that principle. Not the acceptance of it because it says so in the infinite way, not because Joel says it, but if you don't realize it, if you can't accept it, don't look upon it as wrong, because I'll tell you in advance, there is nothing wrong in the message of the infinite way. Not a thing. Whether or not you can accept it all has nothing to do with it. It is all right because it all came from revelation, and it is all proving itself. If not in your experience, in someone else's experience. Sometimes not even in my experience, but in someone else's experience. The point is this: we are entering the period on earth which is known scripturally as the second coming of the Christ. Now, the first coming of the Christ is the coming of the Christ to individual consciousness. Whether Moses receives it, or Elijah, or Isaiah, or Jesus, or John, or Paul, or Buddha, or Lao Tzu, Nanak, it makes no difference. Bodhisattva. Whenever an individual receives the Christ, this is the first coming of Christ. The second coming of Christ to earth is when Christ, spiritual consciousness, will be the consciousness of all mankind, universally. And that is about to take place. When the new generations will not have to be taught metaphysics, they will not have to be taught mysticism or religion. They will be born into it. You see, up to now, religion has been on an individual scale. We have taught individuals religion with the hope of bringing them to spirituality. But then there's been a next generation born, and then they had to be taught, because they were born into the same old belief in two powers. And then they were brought up to some measure of understanding, and they died, and the next generation was born, and they had to be taught. But that's going to be ended now. The second coming of the Christ means that as we establish Christ consciousness within ourselves, we are establishing it for the world. Not necessarily all of the people who are now living in this world, because they are too adamant, they will die out. But it will be the consciousness into which the next generation will be born. The consciousness that the 10 righteous men on earth are now evolving will be the consciousness into which the new generation will be born. The new generation will not be born into an atmosphere of racial, religious, color bigotry and bias. The new generation will not be born into a belief in two powers. I don't necessarily mean the children that are going to be born tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I'm merely saying that Christ consciousness is now evolving on earth. And that as it continues to evolve, the new generation will be born into that consciousness. This second coming of the Christ means the universal coming of the Christ as the consciousness of mankind. In other words, what we, through study and meditation, are developing, they will be born into. You can see examples of that in another way. The degree of education, culture, refinement, art of your parents is what you were born into. And, on the other hand, the lack of that others were born into represents the lack. And so we have really all differing degrees of consciousness on earth, from the very illiterate and the very uncivilized up to the very literate and the very civilized. All depending what consciousness you were born into. Sometimes through parents or grandparents, sometimes through your own development. Well, so it'll be. When children are born into the age that has been given the revelation of God as individual consciousness, of one power, of not condemning, that is the consciousness into which they will be born. Now let us see how that operates. You know that several of the Protestant churches are now investigating the nature of God and the nature of prayer. And you know that the Church of England, for one, threw the devil out of its catechism. Well, now, the new generation is going to be born without a devil. And the generation after that that's born into the Church of England is going to be born into the true God and the true prayer. They don't have to go through all of this superstition and ignorance. Well, you know also that the Pope John has advocated that the Catholic Church no longer adopt this punishment and excommunication idea, but recognize that sin is no part of the sinner. Well, the new Catholic's going to be born into that consciousness then, that they don't have to fry in hell for how many generations before they come forth. Do you not see the amount of enlightenment that already has struck the consciousness of mankind? Do you not see already what the new generation is going to be born into? Well, now just imagine, as these teachings go further, just imagine the consciousness that the new generation is going to be born into. There are Protestant churches everywhere inviting us to come in. We can't go in to educate them. That would be wrong. That would be like saying you are wrong and we are right. We don't do that. When we accept an invitation, we can merely state some of the principles and the milder ones, but they themselves are seeking and seeking and seeking. And every bit of seeking that they are doing is changing their consciousness and the consciousness of their congregation. And therefore, the congregations will bring forth children, brought forth in the new consciousness. And so I'm saying to you that right now, Christ consciousness is evolving as the consciousness of mankind. And the greater recognition that is given to us means the greater degree of Christ consciousness that is being recognized. And this means the greater degree of Christ consciousness that the next generation is being born into. Now, you are witnessing in all relationships between nations a great change taking place. There are as many mistakes being made in this awakening as there was in the days of the ignorance. But at least the mistakes are not of the same nature. Therefore, they will not have the same destructive power. In other words, nations are being given their freedom without having any capacity for maintaining that freedom. Nations are being given the right to self-govern that haven't the awareness of how to self-govern. And therefore, these nations are going to go through years and years and years of hardships. But it makes no difference, because during all of these years, they're gaining the knowledge of how to self-govern, and they're increasing the education of their people. And so regardless of what seems to be the horrors through which they're going, they're heading in the right direction. So it is that all nations in this century have been going through a purification process. You wouldn't recognize it as that ordinarily. You would think of it really as evil men causing all the evil conditions on earth. It hasn't been that at all. It hasn't been the evil men causing these conditions. It has been the higher consciousness coming in and breaking up the evil conditions that have existed on earth. The evil conditions were here. You know, in the States we refer a great deal to the good old days. And when you ask some of our workers in the factories over there about it, they'll say they weren't the good old days for us. And they were right, too. It wasn't the good old days for them. No. Not the days when men were receiving $1 a day wages. Couldn't have been the good old days for them. So the evil conditions were there. And that which we call the evil of now really represent the breaking up of the evil conditions that were there. So it is, you are going to discover that the activity of the Christ in consciousness now is breaking up the evils of this world. In whatever direction you may look, you will discover that nothing good is being destroyed. Nothing good is being destroyed. Evils are being broken up. Now, while they're being broken up, some of us may suffer temporary losses through it. That is a natural phenomena of change. I was in the business world for 22 years as an importer of laces from Europe. And now there is no imported lace industry in the United States, and all but one firm went out bankrupt. Only one firm had the vision to go out before they were bankrupt. All the others went out bankrupt. And you say, oh, what a horrible evil. Heavens no. In place of our little industry, there is now a ready-to-wear industry that makes clothing so much less expensive for women and so much easier to buy, to make, to purchase, so that a great blessing has come upon the world through the ready-to-wear industry. We who didn't have vision to see it coming, we just lost out. So it is that today, the day of automation, it is true that there are individuals who are going to suffer terribly through it. Be thrown out of employment, probably have to live on relief and doles. And you say, what's good about that? Well, so far as they individually are concerned, it isn't good. But just remember that once they are out of the way, it's going to be a whole new world for everybody through automation, for workers as well as for the users of products. You're going to find that those who are employed are going to be employed at far greater wages than the former ones were, and that there will be greater amount of products turned out for far less money. And so you say it's too bad for those who suffered. But then, hasn't that always been the way? People have gone to war to gain their freedom, and they've died, been wounded, lost limbs, but then future generations went on to live in freedom. So that individual suffering in the human experience is inevitable while we're going through this transitional period of change. And there's no way to avoid it. The only way to avoid it would be by everybody becoming spiritual. By being spiritual, they'd be lifted out of it. But everybody hasn't the capacity to turn to the Spirit or to benefit by spiritual wisdom, and therefore they will suffer. In the same way that this second coming of the Christ is not going to benefit all those who are on earth today. It is not going to benefit most of the people in India or China today, or the Southeast, the Oriental part of the world. It is not going to benefit probably most of the people of 30 years in age and up, or even 20 years of age and up. It is producing, this activity of the Christ is producing a new consciousness in which the old things will be wiped out and disappear, and a new world will be born. Some who have the capacity to turn to the Spirit, some who turn to the Spirit and who will have the capacity to stop praying for human betterment, will even now receive the benefit of this new high consciousness. In fact, any infinite way student who finds themselves with enough grace to stop praying for improved humanhood, to turn within only for a revelation of the kingdom of God, the things of God, the peace that God giveth, the kingdom of God, the universe of God. Those can benefit whether they are 20 or whether they are 90, as long as they can inwardly make the transition from praying to a God of spirit for earthly things. In any moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we can be reborn. But that only means because divine grace has led us to this place. And if we can receive this message, we, at any age that we find ourselves, can come into the new consciousness. On the other hand, those who may only be 20 years of age, if they haven't yet been led to a spiritual message, they may go through the rest of their days without benefiting from this new consciousness. But be assured of this, that as the new generations are born, they are being born into this new consciousness, and there will be less on earth of warfare, bias, bigotry, prejudice, less of injustice, less of man's inhumanity to man. And not because men are improving, but because the men who are being born will be born into Christ consciousness, and some who are on earth are dying daily to their humanhood and being reborn of the Spirit. Now, you will find in the new message, in this new tapes, you will find reference to this. You will find that this new message that is given to us is for that purpose of establishing the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. How? Not merely by realizing that the studying that I'm doing is benefiting my life, or the studying that you are doing is benefiting your life, but by realizing this: every truth realized in your consciousness becomes the law unto human consciousness. Now, that operates on the same basis as our practitioner work. Every truth that becomes realized in my consciousness is becoming the law unto the infinite way students' lives. and their minds and their bodies and their morals and their supply. Every truth realized in my consciousness is becoming the law of grace unto thousands of infinite ray students. Now just remember this. Every principle realized in your consciousness is becoming the law unto human consciousness. You may see it operate in some member of your family. You may see it operate in a neighbor. You may see it operate in a business associate or a political associate. But be assured of this. Every realized spiritual truth in your consciousness is becoming a law unto this universe. And wherever you are, some measure of your divine consciousness is influencing those around you. I could give you illustrations from Cape Town to London and from Bombay to Hawaii of illustrations that I have witnessed of how these truths that have been embodied in my consciousness have become the law of harmony unto your consciousness. And how every one of these realized truths in your consciousness has become a law to someone else that has come within the range of your consciousness. It cannot help but be a truth realized in consciousness becomes a law unto consciousness. And how are you going to confine it to a person? It doesn't become a law to a person, it becomes a law unto consciousness. Surely the person most nearly attuned receives the first and greatest benefit. But eventually, watch this circle. Watch how it is that even friends and relatives who cannot directly accept the message are showing forth some good through the message. It's inevitable. It is inevitable. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a business associate, someone who has noticed something in you and says, give me some of it. And so it is, you think, well, how does anyone know that I've got this? I haven't told anyone. You don't have to. That's the beauty of this. The Master said, go and tell no man. Go and tell no man. You don't have to. It's shining in your face. And then someone comes and asks. Or, even without asking, they benefit. No. I give you this as a principle. Every truth realized in your consciousness becomes a law unto consciousness. And therefore, we, on 6 continents and a lot of islands, who are realizing spiritual principles, are forming the consciousness of the new generation. It really didn't begin with us, you know. You have all of the spiritual wisdom of Lao Tzu, of Gautama, of Jesus, of John, of Paul. You have all of the spiritual wisdom of the mystics of the world. That helped to form our consciousness. Without that, we would have been born as savages. It was what was placed in consciousness by the mystics of the world that enabled us to be born not cannibals. Why weren't we born cannibals? Why weren't we born savages? Because a higher consciousness had evolved into this world. And we are all beneficiaries of it. And so it is that the activity of consciousness that functioned as Mrs. Eddy's healing work, has opened this whole world to the idea of spiritual healing. Out of her work came unity, out of her work came new thought. Out of that has come the Orthodox Church being willing to listen to the idea of spiritual healing. And so again, it didn't start with her. Jesus was also doing healing. Gautama the Buddha was doing healing. But here was another instrument that gave it to the world. And so it is that every illumined consciousness has added illumination to the consciousness of the world. Now, we are at an acute stage for this reason, that it never before has been known that every truth received in consciousness becomes a law unto consciousness. That has been revealed through the infinite way. We know it now, and so each truth that we consciously realize, we will realize as being realized or established in human consciousness. And that will give greater power to the work that we are doing. Some of the earlier metaphysical work was only the patient was improved. But now we know better. It isn't only the patient that's improved, it's all human consciousness is improved. It was prophesied that in this century the secret of spiritual power would be revealed. Well, it has been revealed in the infinite way. Spiritual power is not a power that can be used. And spiritual power is not a power over anything or anybody. Spiritual consciousness is the consciousness of perfection, which is the consciousness of mankind. And in that recognition, you bring it forth into expression. And don't forget, as you know this, just think of the difference. Heretofore, we malpracticed everybody on earth who wasn't of our own household. Heretofore, if we didn't like a nation, we hated them, and we criticized them, and we malpracticed them. Heretofore, if we didn't like an individual, we did it. Or if we didn't like a whole nation, we did it. Or if we didn't like a whole religion, we did it. But remember that we are living in an era now in which already consciousness is so imbued with love that even the Roman Catholic Church is willing to acknowledge that the rest of us are not going to hell and that they can intermarry with us without making us change our... In fact, it says that each person should have the right to choose their own religion. This has never been done in that church before. Do you not see the higher consciousness at work? Do you not see that it's already here? When they are willing to forgive sinners, they are willing to acknowledge us poor Protestants. We're not even Protestants, are we? Matter of fact, rightly speaking, we can't be called Christians because we disclaim so much of what Christianity is accepted. We're just heathens. Heathens who know the truth. Who know enough of it at least to love our neighbor, whether our neighbor agrees with us or disagrees with us, whether our neighbor is our friend or our enemy. We are willing to feed our enemy. See the higher consciousness that has already come into being on earth. And then believe me, not because I say it, but believe me because somewhere your heart must reveal it to you, that the second coming of Christ is here, and that we are playing a part in its unfoldment. And one of the major ways is by knowing that every truth realized in our individual consciousness becomes a law. Well, now, just imagine this. A group of our students last Sunday met in a small town in California on Sunday morning for a prayer service on the beach. And they were greeted there by policemen and told they couldn't stay there because a tidal wave was due to explode at any time. Well, they were given permission to stay long enough for their prayer service and then immediately evacuated from the beach. And one of the students said, "We must not accept this. We must not accept this. We must do something about it. We must understand the nature of one power," etc., etc. And this little group met and agreed that they would realize this. And now they're out looking for the tidal wave. It hasn't appeared. Nobody can find where it went. Therefore, truth realized in my consciousness became the law unto their consciousness, and the truth realized in their consciousness became the law of safety to the whole community. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
When we went to New Zealand a couple of years ago, we were warned not to go there on a certain day. There was to be a tidal wave in the Pacific, and it was to hit the center of Auckland. We hit the center of Auckland that day. Tidal wave didn't frighten us. And the volcanic eruption that was to have taken place in the Pacific did take place. But the tidal wave that was to hit the middle of Auckland hasn't struck there yet. They haven't found it. Do you not see that a truth realized in the consciousness of an individual becomes the law unto that individual, unto that community, unto the entire world? So it is. Now, once you remember that you're not dealing with a religious teaching that is really meant to glorify you or make you healthy, wealthy, and wise, but that it is only to show forth the Christ consciousness, and the fruit of it is the health or the wealth or the happiness, but that God did not intend this for you or me. Could you imagine such a thing as God revealing these truths of the infinite way to me for my benefit? Do you have any picture of anything like that? No. Then when I received them, I had to do something. And that something was start to share them. But because it was an activity of the Christ, I humanly didn't know how. And so every step I have been led. Every step I have been led. So it is with you. Never think for a minute that God's grace brought you to a message of this nature for your good. No, God's grace doesn't work that way. God's grace brought you to this message that you may show forth the fruitage of Christ consciousness and therefore be an instrument for establishing it on earth. And you may be assured that every truth you know, every healing that takes place through your consciousness is establishing that truth, that healing grace, in human consciousness. And one of these days, people will be talking this way as if this had been the language forever. We won't be here, so we won't know that it has become the universal language, unless, of course, in our rebirth, Some of us may be shown that we were here when all this was beginning. But otherwise we'll come back to participate in it without ever knowing that we helped to inaugurate it. So it would be a good idea to pray that in our new birth that we be given the vision of the part we played in it, so at least we can enjoy that. Thank you.